Hello and welcome to a new video. In this video I will be servicing the rear suspension of my Triumph Sprint 955i. The rear suspension is supposed to be serviced every 10,000 kilometers as per the manufacturer's instructions, and you basically just take apart the rear suspension and the rear wheel bearing and check everything and see if there's enough grease and check for wear and tear. So the first thing that needs to be done here is to remove the exhaust, which is quite easy. You just have two bolts, one that holds up the clamp to the pipe of the exhaust and one that holds the exhaust to the rear foot pegs, and removing it is quite easy. So next up I will remove the rear wheel. For this I take apart the clip on the right side and then I take out the crash pad that I have inserted on the other end. To later on service the wheel bearing, I need to access the hub and take out the axle. So I take an old blunt screwdriver and hammer out the notch that's in the nut on the left side. Then both of the nuts, left and right side, need to be loosened up. For this it's better to have someone to help you, to have the rear wheel on the ground and someone put their foot on the brake, just so you can properly loosen the nuts without applying any pressure or force to the gearbox or to the rest of the bike. So next up I take out the wheel. For this I take out everything that's below the nut where the little clip goes on, and I make sure to put it away in the right order just so nothing gets lost, and then I take out the wheel from the wheel arch. In my case this is a little bit more difficult because the hanger of my side case is in the way, but I manage this with a little bit more effort. And after taking out the wheel I realized that taking out the wheel after servicing the suspension would have been a bit more clever. Anyways, I take a few pieces of wood and rest them underneath the rear brake disc so the suspension isn't in tension while I'm working on it. And then I continue with taking apart the suspension parts. So most of the footage of me taking out the bolts is unfortunately unusable because I'm not used to the chest rig and the camera angle is just garbage. The most important one is the one that you see me work on here. It's the one in the swing arm. So there's a bolt that goes into the swing arm that fixes an axle in there. And the bolt usually comes out pretty easy, but the axle is really tough to take out. It has some threads up in the front that takes an M14 by 1.5 millimeter bolt to screw in and then to move out the axle and pull it out. And this is usually really difficult because the axle just likes to rust in there and you need to take it out so you can service the bearing that's in the leverage. So I use the bolt in combination with some pieces of wood to slowly force out the bolt and trying not to damage anything else. All of the other bolts are just easy to take out. There's one at the top and the bottom of the shock absorber. There's the one in the swing arm, and then there should be two more in the leverage. All of these need to be taken out, and then the needle bearings that sit inside the leverage and inside the shock need to be inspected and cleaned and re-greased. And after that it's just putting everything back together. All of those bolts get the same amount of torque, which is 48 Newton meters. So another thing with the axle is, as you can see, once you've got the screw in there to take the axle out and you've got the axle out, now you need to get the screw out of the axle again. And I do this by using a vise and just crushing it between two pieces of wood. This usually works, but depending on how much force you had to use, it might be really difficult. Now to improve this for the next time, I take some fine sanding paper and I work on the corrosion that sits on the axle, and afterwards when I assemble everything I make sure that everything is greased. So now that I've cleaned everything and re-greased everything, it's time to reassemble all of the things. And this is really a straightforward job. The linkage itself has a little notice upon it where you can see which side is up. And then you just need to stick all the bolts back in and make sure that you tighten everything to 48 Newton meters. And it's really not something where you can mess up a lot. Now with the suspension serviced and back together, it's time to take out the axle out of the hub. For this I need to remove the rear brake caliper, which is something that's really hard to get to. Even if you remove the chain guard, which I'm not doing here, it's really hard to get to the front screw because you need to go by the chain. And the rear screw also doesn't really let the head of the ratchet get very well in there. But it's something you just have to live with and work around if you do this kind of service. Next up is the removal of the outer nut that sits on the wheel hub, and even though this has been loosened, it takes quite a bit of force to unscrew it, which is why I've put the bike into gear and I'm gently working against it, but I need to use the big ratchet because it's really a lot of force to get it loose. Next up I loosen the bolt that clamps down on the axle, and after that I can just take the axle out of the hub. And the next steps are basically the same as with the suspension. I take everything apart, I inspect everything, I clean it and I re-grease it, and then it's time to just put everything back together. The bolts that keep in the caliper get 40 Newton meters. The clamp bolt that clamps down on the axle gets 55 Newton meters. And both of the big nuts on the outside get 146 Newton meters of torque. You also need to remember that for the left side you need to hammer down that little notch of the big nut after you've torqued it. And on the right side, don't forget the little clip that secures the nut in place as well. For applying torque to both of the nuts on the rear axle, it's usually better if you have help. For the one on the right side, you can do it yourself by stepping on the rear brake while you torque it down. On the left hand side, it's really better if you have someone else that helps you. Unfortunately, the footage for torquing down the nut on the left side and for reassembling the exhaust are missing. But I think I've shown everything that's important. Thank you very much for watching. I hope to see you again on another video. Goodbye!